We are now in Palestine, Israel. We are in the middle of transitional period in the academic discussion over Palestinian-Israeli issue. Mainly, the literature were occupied until now, and it is still maybe occupied by the concept of the national conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, and the need for the separate national self-determination for Palestinians and for Israelis in two separate states that related to the UN resolution in 47 in the solution that based in two-state option for Palestine, the Palestinian question, or for the Israeli-Palestinian question. I think myself, and I will be back to this point, that we are in the middle of a change of this paradigm. I've already wrote a lot about this issue since 96. I think that there is no way for two-state solution, basically, and we need to move to a new paradigm of decolonization of Palestine. I mean, to create a one-state solution based on equality, and there is a discussion over what kind of a one-state solution. I mean, many people, they demand one liberal state and to establish one collective of territorial nationality in Palestine, Israel. Palestinians, of course, want this to be a Palestinian identity, joint civil identity, and Israelis want it an Israeli identity, basically. But I think that it doesn't work like this. I mean, it is quite sure that there are two collectives in Palestine, Israel. There is the Jewish Israeli collective, which is start as a colonial initiative before 100 years, and it developed in the last 1 century to have a very clear national conscience among Israeli Jews, which is, in my view, is the basic component of nationality, is the basic, is the conscience, that people think that they are a nation. And there is a conscience of one nation among Israeli Jews, according to my view. There is discussion over this, but I think that this is basically the issue. The other side of the conflict is Palestinians, and they have a basic conscience, although they went through a basic process of fragmentation. I mean, Palestinians in general, they already have different national, conscience. Those Palestinians that in the West Bank and Gaza are the core of Palestinian nationalism, and Palestinians in Israel are in the margin of Palestinization, Palestinian identity. The concept of autonomy for Palestinians in Israel is based on the old paradigm of two-state solution. If there will be a two-state solution, then what is the solution for Palestinians in Israel? Is equality, civic equality, and plus non-territorial educational and cultural autonomy as part of the Israeli state. But this is, as I said before, now we are moving, I think, in my view, we are moving to a new paradigm. This will turn over all the situation of Palestine, Israel, and then we need to reconsider what I gave the lecture before 2 years. It's about having one state in the whole territory of Palestine and having two national non-territorial autonomies in Palestine, Israel for Israeli Jews and for Palestinians in Israel, a kind of binationalism, as we consider it as binational state. But I want now to go back and to give my vision about the discussion that was started before almost 30 years. In 87, the first Palestinian intifada erupted in the West Bank, and then there was a belief, a deep belief among academics in the Palestinian national movement and among many Israelis that we are reaching the point of having two-state solution. This was before 30 years. And then many Palestinians and Israeli intellectuals and Palestinian intellectuals, they start consider the concept of two-state solution and then what to do with Palestinians in Israel, and they suggest the concept of autonomy, cultural autonomy for Palestinians in Israel. This is related to a theory, in my view, it is related to a theory that was developed by Irene Jane. I don't know if you're aware of her article about the bargaining theory. Irene Jane, she developed the concept of bargaining theory. She claims that the status of minority is a reflection of the interaction between three basic entities: the state, the minority, and the mother state of the minority. It's frequent in Europe. I mean, and it's for sure it's also relevant to the case for many minorities. It's like the Quebecois and their mother country is France. The South Tyrol people, their reference, it is Austria or Germany. And you have the German minority, of course, here in Hungary. So the interaction between these three major powers is the context where the demand for autonomy or for equality for the minority develops. I think that in the Israeli case, if this project of two-state solution were I mean, if there will be a two-state solution, then we Palestinians and Israel face their future as from one side as a minority in the Jewish state, which is considered to be the state of the Jewish people and not their own state. It's not a civil state, as you already know, from one side, and the fact that Palestinians and Israel as a marginal group outside the Palestinian national movement. It is, I mean, you have to think, I mean, it's a little bit complicated because Palestinians and Israel are Palestinians. But historically, when Palestinian nationalism developed its institution, its national movement, they exclude Palestinians in Israel. It is by the PLO, it is by conscience. Arafat was made, the PLO, the chairman of the PLO, was made his decision to exclude Palestinians and Israel from his future project because he considered his project of establishing a state in the West Bank and Gaza and Jerusalem, excluding Palestinians in Israel. What kind of, then this, following the Oslo Agreement, and in the main years of the Oslo Agreement, I was involved, and I myself was involved in politics, then the concept of autonomy for Palestinians and Israel start to emerge, to be one of the concepts that is under consideration for the future of Palestinian minority in Israel. What's considered to be, what is known to be Arabs in Israel, Israeli Arabs. And there are three major types of autonomy were represented for Palestinians and Israel. The first one is the territorial model. And it was presented by a professor at the Birzeit University, Said Zidani. I mean, he's still active. We work together now in some kind that called Palestinian Forum. But he proposed the concept of territorial autonomy for Palestinians and Israel. He thought about an idea of having some territorial enclaves inside Israel, beside the Palestinian state, where Palestinians and Israel are concentrated in the Galilee and in the Triangle, and in the Negev, of course. The second concept, and that, I mean, actually he was the only one that presented this idea. It wasn't accepted because Palestinians and Israel, if you know the map of Israel, of Palestine and Israel, they live in different places, so they are not concentrated in one territorial area. The second option of autonomy, it was presented by the intellectual, the well-known intellectual Azmi Bshara. It's called the cultural autonomy. He presented the idea that Arabs in Israel should enjoy the right to run their cultural institution, including having their university, their religious affairs, their schools, system, etc., etc. And it was part of his party, the Tajammu, the National Alliance Party program. And there is another, and third, I'm one of the people that supported the idea of having some kind of political, institutional autonomy for Palestinians and Israel. It's not only having cultural institution, but allowing them to choose their leadership and having their political institution as part of the Israeli state. If this two-state solution would work So, I think that we need to consider the concept of autonomy as part of two strategies. And this is very important because it's not only Palestinians who propose, Palestinians and Israel, who propose the concept of autonomy. There are many Israeli Jews supported the idea of autonomy, including the sociologist Sami Smoha, who wrote a book about autonomy for Arabs in Israel. So we have to differentiate between two concepts that related to the concept of autonomy, two strategies. The one is a strategy that means to keep or to preserve the Jewish nature of Israel, to keep the superiority, to keep the control of the Jews in Israel over the state, to keep the state as only a Jewish state. So then the idea here is to give Palestinians and Israel their autonomy to run their own affairs and to leave the big question of the nature of the state as a Jewish question only, as not the question of all citizens. And this is a mean of control. It is giving them the autonomy and asking them to say, no, you are not responsible for the general nature of the state. Keep it for us as the core group, the Jews, the Israeli Jews. The other strategy, which is, as I said, was presented by Palestinians, they present the idea of autonomy as a means of equality, of a tool to reach equality in the state and to erase the Jewish nature of the state. The autonomy is a strategy to confront the Jewish character of the state and reach equality. And this was presented by Palestinians in Israel. And as I said before, now it is a question that we need to consider. And I think that basically the question of non-territorial self-determination, which was relevant for Palestinians in Israel, if the concept of two-state solution would work, now it should be part of the new thinking in how to resolve the conflict under the concept of decolonization. I mean, the decolonization means in my view, at least, in the Israeli-Palestinian context, is reaching equality between Palestinians in general and Israeli Jews in general. And as I think that we will hear from Shedmi later, among Palestinians and among Jews in Israel, among Palestinians, all the Palestinians that live in Palestine, in Israel-Palestine, and among Jews, there are different subgroups. You have the Haredi Jews, you have Palestinians in Israel that have some kind of their own demands. You have Palestinians in Jerusalem, you have Palestinians in Gaza, you have the Oriental Jews, you have in Israel. So you have to build some kind of complicated situation of autonomies for all. It is, in my view, it should be of course, under the umbrella of equality. Many people think that there is contradiction between having autonomy and having the state of its citizens, the whole of everyone. As a civil state. I think that there is no contradiction. There is no contradiction in Canada in the constitutional level. In practice, sometimes there are difficulties. In the constitutional level, Canada is the state of all Canadians, but still you have in Canada it is facilitated by the fact that there are 10 states. So you have the states, the Quebec state, that it protects the rights of the French. But if you look into the cases in Europe, like Switzerland or Belgium, you have the state belongs to all citizens as the citizens of Belgium, and then on the other side they enjoy the right of their own self-determination as a collective. So I think that we have to, I'm finishing with this. I think that we need to think about the concept of non-territorial autonomy as part of the general concept of non-territorial self-determination, and it is our duty as academics to start and to confront the concept of self-determination as a territorial concept, because nations, in my view, first of all, they think about controlling their life, and then they start to explain what is the meaning of controlling their life. And many nationalistic people say controlling our life means to control all the territory. In a mixed situation, like in what you have in Europe, which is at least in Eastern Europe, the nationalism is more ethnic rather than territorial, so you have mixed communities that live together. You cannot claim territorial self-determination for only one group. It is also the case in Palestine, Israel, and I think that non-territorial self-determination is a big contribution. If we succeed to develop the concept and to push to the public discussion, this will be a major contribution of us, the academics, to the public, to the politicians, to reconsider the concept of territorial and to move to a new concept of non-territorial self-determination. Especially, we live in this new world where everybody lives and moves from one place to another, and of course, when nobody have the how to say, have the right to control my right or anybody right. If he, let's say, an immigrant, he immigrates from Lebanon to France, and he wants to keep his tradition, so he should have the right. And on the other side, of course, the state have the right to demand being good citizens. So I think that there is no contradiction, and we should insist that this is the way to move forward in many societies, not only in our case, Palestine, Israel, but also as a solution for many other cases like Iraq, like Turkey, of course, and of course, in many cases in Africa. And I think that should be reconsidered also in Europe. Otherwise, we will continue with the same problems to deal with the same problem for the next generation or for the next 2 generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So it's my painful duty to, I'm announcing, and I take all the blame and responsibility for the belated start. So I take the responsibility for a 10-minute overreach of our time. That leaves us 15 minutes for Q&A. And that gives us one round of questions and then one round of answers. So please, now we're going to collect questions. I have one question myself, and just to, I would want to pick up on where Mehmet, you began. I think the wonderful thing with NTAs is that it's less controversial. So it blurs the unfortunate but very prevalent view and approach in ethnopolitics and minority rights that this is a zero-sum game, right? So what minorities get is something that the majority, lose, and this is very unfortunate. This is my question to all of you: if you were given, and you're not given more than 1 minute, how specific would you outline if you were given the task to, you could do whatever you want, the Knesset would implement it. What would you suggest? And this sort of follows up with the last presentation. Language rights. Is it the minimum, or how far can we go? How ambitious can NTAs go? Is our linguistic rights a minimum, or where can we go? Is it an antibiotic? Is it a potential cure, a vaccine, or just a painkiller? Is it just the first step? Okay, so that's my question to the panelists, and we can we connect now questions from the audience. I see one in the chat, and I have Ronnie. Why don't we begin, because one of our participants started already. So
I have a really
and then
question.
Ronnie.
I actually want to hear Professor Assad's thoughts on. When it comes to one Israeli state that would hold both nationalities, the Israeli identity and the Palestinian identity, do you think that could lead to a possible Kosovo situation, that they do gain their right to vote, they do gain their right to hold their institutions, but then in turn that leads to, let's say, a referendum, and they want much more than autonomy? Do you think that's a possibility if you go with a one-state solution?
Okay, thank you. Ronnie, you are now unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. And I don't think that you can see me for some reason, but doesn't matter. I cannot see my image. Anyway, I'm talking now from Canada. It's pitch dark here. And all the 3 speakers mentioned Canada, which is a kind of interest. And none of the 3 speakers mentioned apartheid, which has been it has been long in the discussion in general, but the latest report by B'Tselem and human rights organization specifically mentioned that apartheid is not an issue just for Israel dominating the territories, but for the whole state. And what Natal described as semi-territorial autonomies and the existence of separate spheres that are not politically correct, etc., it kind of basically says, even before the national law, the basic law of the national state, a form of apartheid. And I have the feeling that in order to change things, you have to acknowledge the elephant in the room, and in order to, deal with it and find solution to it.
Okay.
And I'm presenting it as a statement. Like I mean, it's a question to all the three speakers. It's different to Assad. He speaks a little bit about other issues, but it's still relevant to the solution of the whole one-state solution that Assad mentioned.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We have another question from the audience.
I have rather a remark to exactly what Ronnie said right now and Metal. You were kind of criticizing these separate schools, and Ronnie went even further in saying that that's kind of an apartheid. But separate schools are a consequence of autonomy. Autonomy can turn into apartheid if it's not enhanced with democracy. So I think it's the problem. So if you have autonomous institutions, of course you separate groups by giving them different ties. You need other levels where you bring them together again in the shared rule of the political. But if we go for cultural autonomy, I'm not saying that this is a good option. It might not be the best option, but the separation of institutions and cultural institutions and learning, that's a logic consequence of autonomous elements in legislation.
Thank you very much. Okay, do we have any other questions? This is our last time. Yes, please.
I also have something to add to this. I was just wondering, how would you, in practical terms, solve the schooling issue, to avoid this separatedness that you mentioned earlier?
Again, can you ask again, Timo?
You mentioned this separatedness as creating separate communities,
yes,
that children do not meet really.
So what's the option?
Do you have any idea
yeah.
how would you see it implemented in practical terms to avoid this kind of?
Yes, because I like your hands-on approach very much.
Okay, if there's no more questions
Great question.
From the audience, then I think we should go in the reverse order of original appearance, if you don't mind. So just to shake things up. So Metal.
Oh, so okay, so I'm the first. Okay, so how specific would I outline the model I advocate? Well, it's not a vaccine, it's not a painkiller, it is just the beginning, thinking about a shared space, at least regarding languages. It's only what I see as a very minimal beginning of some hope. That's it. Now, Ronnie, Alan, it's true that none of us mentioned apartheid, and it also relates to Boris' question. So it's true that autonomy might lead to separate schools, and separate schools might be viewed as apartheid model. So I do not advocate for separate schools. So in my kind of ambitious, or in my dream, all children in Israel are going to bilingual schools where they can speak Arabic and Hebrew. I think that's the best solution, it is already working through, not many schools are bilingual, but we have like at least 6 schools in the country, not in Herzliya, my city, but we have in Haifa, we have in Jerusalem, in Tel Aviv, bilingual schools that are working. They are not perfect, they have their difficulties, but it works. So we have pupils, young students meeting Jews, meeting Arabs, and that's terrific. And they see the language, they see the culture, they see something. And it leads me to Timo's question, and again to Boris' question, what the option I suggest. So again, the minimal option I see is creating and sustaining bilingual education. That's a very minimal step that should be done in Israel, and it's not done. It's done only, as I said, in like 6 primary schools in Israel. And Ronnie, I don't think that the apartheid term is very helpful because it makes people very resentful. I do think that there is apartheid in the occupied territories, of course, but the fact that, for instance, I have a dean who is also my best friend, but he's Muslim, and he's a citizen in Israel, and he's a professor, he's well published and everything, but the fact that he's successful in spite being Muslim, we also have Assad here. He's very modest, but he's a very famous professor in Israel. Everybody knows him, and he's very successful. I think. Well, it's not perfect. It's not the best reality, but I think that these 2 examples at least prove something, that inside Israel, not in the occupied territories. The occupied territories can be described as apartheid. I don't have a problem with that. But Israeli citizens, I think, Arab Israeli citizens, I think, enjoy some kind of equal rights, at least potential for equal rights.
Thank you very much. And Rela, can you?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I would say that I'm very well aware of the apartheid situation we're living in, that is preserved or by very violent police and military forces. I'm aware of it. What I'm trying to say is that there are other processes going on, or changes going on in Israel, and they are unrecognized. Not many academics talk about it. For example, the many new urban kibbutzim that have been built and opened in all around the country. And I'm talking about changes that I believe in Generation Y. I believe in the younger generation. There are many of them are making changes. What I call they are building a new world from below, like communes, like familial families, like a queer identity. I think that this national identity is kind of breaking down. More people endorse local identities, not so much national. There are many initiatives going on, new initiatives going on in cities, in small towns, and we don't recognize them. That's why I think that, I think that there are, most of the changes are the leaders are led by the Generation Y, by younger generations, like the rebel against extinction is even younger people lead it. So we have, and I think that the notion of the notion of state and state identity is kind of breaking down, if not collapsing at all. I think it's the beginning. I don't think I'm looking forward to see the changes coming in, and I think we have to acknowledge them. And when I'm talking about local identities or autonomies, I'm talking about also about, for example, Ethiopian Jews in Israel. This is a large population which is right now oppressed in Israel and suffer from police violence, and but they are demanding their autonomy too. And I think we can see different populations demanding autonomy. Local groups, Ethiopians, of course Palestinians, mostly Palestinians, and I think that the changes are kind of developing. And what I'm trying to say is let all of us acknowledge them, see them, and see how they are leading to a new kind of society. This is and I'm very well aware of the apartheid. At the same time, I'm not denying it, not at all. I'm not denying it, but I think we have to acknowledge and we have to support these changes that are coming from below by younger generations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and Assad, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I'll be brief. Thank you, Mital, and thank you, Ariella, for your comments. I really agree in general with the basic characterization of the situation. Although I think that I start by saying that I think the two-state solution is already failed. It is an answer to Ronnie. And what we are doing now, what we are in the middle of the move toward a new paradigm, from the national paradigm to a post-decolonization paradigm, which means the decolonization in Palestine-Israel context is the de-apartheid, is abolishing the apartheid system. It is, of course, there is a kind of, in my view, it's a apartheid plus. It's not just like South Africa. It's much complicated in the Israeli case. You have Gaza on one side, which is partially independent. It's not independent. Israel still controls Gaza. And you have Palestinians in Israel, and Palestinians in Israel, they cannot live in 500 localities in Israel. This is apartheid. When you are inside the system and you cannot join people that are separate and privileged people, the Jews, the masters of the land. So this is apartheid. Of course, we need to move from this concept. And the other thing that I claim, that the concept of autonomy for Palestinians in Israel is too late. I mean, you cannot solve the conflict, the internal conflict, by allowing Palestinian Israelis to enjoy autonomy. You have to connect it with the general situation in Palestine. So this is, I think that it was, I hope that it was clear. Then it comes to the question, what do I mean? So the problem here that I'm trying to emphasize is the general outlook, the bigger question, what to do, and where we are heading from here. It's a question that related to all the questions. What is autonomy means? What kind of arrangement in the one state? There is no clear concept, neither for me. I'm aware of all literature about the one-state solution. There is no clear picture. I have my own view, and many people will argue with me. I think that the only way to move forward is to imagine some kind of binationalism in Palestine, Israel, which means two autonomous entities, and there is no contradiction. There is no contradiction in any case between having one civic identity and having national autonomy. There is no contradiction. People want to, I mean, it is not a total separation. Autonomy is not separation. It is being part of the system under the infrastructure of one civic identity. I mean, if you are a Canadian, you enjoy your right as a Quebecois, as a French, or an Anglophone, under the concept of being a Canadian citizen. It is true for Belgium, it's true for Switzerland. It is not it is under that same system. So what we have to develop is one shared civility in Palestine, Israel, and of course giving respect, room for different identities in the public sphere. And giving respect for different identities means respecting separate schools. I mean, I sent my daughters, 3 daughters, to this joint school in the Galilee. But this is not the common. The common thing that I respected, and I think it should be there, is having separate school system. It is part of having your own national identity, or having a law. I mean, it's not law. It is a court system and separate court system. So we need to develop. It is complicated to have one state with 2 national groups equals. It is different a little bit than the classical non-territorial autonomy in Europe. Because in Europe you have the majority of Italians, and you demand, or Hungarians, and you demand certain rights for the German minority. In the Palestinian-Israeli case, if we move from the concept of 2 states to the concept of 1 state paradigm, which include the decolonization, the de-apartheid process that should be there to reach a solution, a future solution for the conflict, then we speak about not only national non-territorial autonomy for one group, for the Palestinians. No, we demand non-territorial autonomy as expression of non-territorial self-determination in equal base in 1 state. So we have 2 national identities with supra-national belonging. It could be. I mean, many people will ask me, and when I present speak about the 1 state solution, they ask me, what is the name of the state? I said, well, there is no problem to have 2 names. There are many states in the world, like Egypt. It has two names. It's the Arab Republic, and it is Egypt. That's true for many other states. This is not a problem of language. It is important. I'm not saying that it's not important, but you can say it Israel Palestine or Palestine Israel, whatever you want. I mean, it is not the essence of the problem. The essence of the problem, having shared civility, civic identity, and giving respect to the 2 communities, Palestinian community, Israeli community. In the new paradigm, I think that the essence of this is abolishing the apartheid system, the separation system, and establishing one unity. At least in my way of thinking, after 70 years, the 2-state solution is a total failure. Having a separate institution for Palestinians in Israel, Palestinian minority in Israel, is also a failure. Let's now the time, and there is a lot of discussion now in Israel Palestine. There is a lot of discussion, including the reports that was mentioned by Ronnie. I'm aware of them, of course. There is a lot of discussion that we are in the middle. There is a new book by Ian Lustig, the Lost Paradigm. So people are involved in this concept, and I think it makes sense. I mean, we are in the middle of a change, and this is very important. And this is why I think that introducing the non-territorial situation as an expression of self-determination, not only an autonomy, a minor thing, but a big thing of self-determination, will help us also in the Palestinian-Israel case. And I think it will help also in Iraq and in Kosovo. It might also be helpful. So let's consider enlarging stretching the concept of non-territorial situation, autonomy. This is what my main argument. Let's stretch it in order to give it the essence of being a type of self-determination. I think that Wilson, in his points in 1917, his main failure, he didn't understand the situation in Europe. He thought about the American concept of self-determination. He think about Americans. He didn't consider the case of the Balkans. He didn't consider the case of Eastern Europe. This is the main failure, because he wasn't aware. He thought that America is the world. This is the concept, should be. And this is the main source of conflict. This is why I claim that it is time to reconsider the concept of self-determination and to try legally, politically, sociologically, to reconsider the concept of national self-determination, not in the territorial, but in the non-territorial concepts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. This leaves me with a few closing remarks, again apologizing for the delay and this inconvenience at the beginning. But let me finish well. First of all, my point that the magic didn't happen in a way that we didn't come up with the solution.
No, we'll keep something for next year conference. Don't worry.
But the magic did happen. Not only that it was to me, it's still a thrilling experience to be back together. For, God knows for how long, but at least we are, you know. So it was for me truly an inspiring event. Not only being with you, but I also think that the ambition and the potential for non-territorial autonomies in cases like Israel are not only promising, but we pretty much have seen that it is the only way to go, because clearly the two-state model is not very likely to happen. The one-state model doesn't seem to be working very well either. So I'm not a very pragmatist, technocratic lawyer in general, but I am a firm believer in the limited but effective potential in certain political and legal institutions. What should give us hope is, even if you consider, and this is where I leave you and thank you for being here, even if you consider the Stalinist, Soviet model, the only constitutional construction that regime even took seriously was federalism. So, which of course is a territorial autonomy.
That's not true.
Well, I mean, one of the
That's
few.
really not true.
Well, it did exist.
No,
though.
it did not true.
Okay,
it's not true.
We'll discuss that over coffee. But
No,
so I think that
Soviet Union, that's on the paper, but that's really not true.
Right. Okay, we disagree on this. But then, and hopefully we'll resolve this in a friendly dispute over coffee. Again, I'm sorry for keeping you up, and that shortens the coffee break. I thank you very much for this
Thanks.
for this panel, and
Thank you.
And thank you all.